All right, welcome to class. This is the week one forum for American federal government. This week we want you to kind of build some building blocks, get some basic information that you'll need for the rest of the semester. We want you to be able to understand the difference between different forms of government. What's the difference between a democracy and an authoritarian government? We want you to be able to describe the rights and responsibilities that citizens have in a democratic society. We want you to be able to describe the social composition of the American population and how it's kind of evolved over time. We want you to be able to describe how cultural values in the United States, we really place a premium on liberty, equality, and democracy, and how those interact with one another. And then we want you to be able to summarize Americans' attitudes towards government. Okay, when you look at that opening story, I think it tells you a very important sort of lesson about citizenship, right? It begins with this woman named Kimberly Green Yates and the problem that we faced at the beginning of the pandemic, which was the shortage on personal protection equipment that public health care officials need, the public health care workers need in order to interact with people who have contracted a highly contagious disease like COVID-19. So the fact of the matter is that government plays an important role in ensuring that we have a healthcare system to begin with, and that healthcare workers have access to the tools that they need in order to do their job. And of course, the problem with a pandemic like COVID-19 is that it's extraordinary. It acts like the flu, except it kills 3 or 4 times as many people. It's far more, if you catch it and you don't have a vaccine for it, it will overwhelm many people's immune systems and cause it cause your immune system to overreact, which can kill you. It literally feels like, for people who have described it and survived, it feels like your lungs are filling with concrete. So government has to step in those kinds of instances in order to respond to those kinds of problems. And the reality is that Americans today have widely divergent opinions on the appropriate role of government. And so that creates a real challenge for how we're going to go about governing. In terms of understanding the difference between different kinds of government, think about what it means to live in a democracy. I mean, historically, it has meant that you have freedom of movement, that you have freedom of speech, that you can act in certain ways so long as your actions are not hurting other people. In authoritarian countries, the government prevents those kinds of things. And I think you're going to witness this, unfortunately, playing out in Afghanistan as the Taliban has very rapidly reconsolidated their control. They're bent on reestablishing a theocratic system of government, which is a form of authoritarianism in which religious figures basically control the government. And I think that that's going to be, frankly, tragic and unfortunate. But, it's unfortunately sort of the reality that the United States can't control everything in the world. So government is how we go about governing our behavior, right? Is government needed? I think the answer to that, and obviously as someone who's studied politics for most of my adult life, the answer to that is yes, clearly. There's no way of avoiding it. Different forms of government are, again, defined by the amount of freedom that the government is willing to accord to citizens. Authoritarian governments, basically, they'll let you act as long as your actions are not harmful to their interests. The minute you step out of line, authoritarian governments are perfectly willing to, make you disappear. In a democratic society, individuals have rights, and governments have to act within the law. If they're going to arrest you, they have to say that, this person broke the law. So over time, democracy goes back to the ancient Greeks, although the Greeks had a different notion of what democracy meant. But in the modern era, increasingly as governments began to limit themselves, as economic interests began to compete, and government began to say, well, we need to stay out of the way of that, that began to encourage greater levels of freedom. Okay, so think about that as well. You know, just how freedom kind of has evolved in the modern sense, and how it is interactive, right? Uh, the last thing I want to talk about before before I open the forum is the idea that citizenship is based on participation, knowledge, and this notion of efficacy. And efficacy basically means agency. It means by voting or by participating in a political activity, I am making a difference. If you believe that personally, it gives you a strength. It gives you a sense of purpose that is sort of innate to citizenship. And so I hope you guys understand the importance and the fragility of political efficacy. Okay. So again, as you read through this material, again, this is the introduction. There shouldn't be anything that's kind of beyond your understanding, but if there is, please raise the issue in the forum. That's basically the best place for me to get an idea of how to help you guys. So think about it. What's the hardest thing for you to understand? What are you struggling with? What's in your view the most important information in this chapter? And let's talk about that. Let's have a great week of discussion.